here I am on my phone, which is very, it's not very good using this phone, but we'll just have to do. So that's the introduction. And the next thing I'd like to say is, as I was listening to you, that a few of you said you lived in Archway. That actually had quite a big effect on me, surprisingly. And the reason for that is because I first came across Triratna, or the FWBO as it was then, in Archway in 1974, when I was a young man. And obviously it's had a massive effect on me. And it wasn't long after that that I moved into one of the communities up in Archway. And I lived there for a few years. And it was very, very important time for me. So when people said they lived in Archway, surprisingly, it felt like a really strong pull deep down inside me. I don't know what it was the pull of, but it was like I was being pulled into something. Yeah, really quite strong feeling. What's the other thing? Oh yeah, and now, so this evening, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a chapter from The Wind in the Willows. Now, why am I going to do that? It's because years and years ago, when I was a youngish man, I read Wind in the Willows, and you know what it's about, don't you? You've got Ratty, a mole, badger, and Toad. They're the main characters. Toad's a complete idiot, and he creates a lot of the comedy. But and there's also Otter, who's he's not around very much, but he is a figure in there. And it's a beautiful book. In fact, I read it aloud to my wife last year. She had an eye operation, and she couldn't really read. Actually, she could, but she thought she wouldn't be able to. But I had arranged to read the book to her because she's German, never heard of it before. And it was a delightful thing to do. And Wind in the Willows is an interesting book because it's childlike. It's about little animals and adventures and comedy and so on. But there's something really lovely about it in that it's also about friendship, especially the friendship between Mole and Ratty. It's really lovely friendship they have, but also between those two and Badger and Toad and Otter. And it also kind of celebrates life. I was thinking, it's quite different from the Dharma in a way, in that the Dharma says, look, life's full of suffering. You need to get out. You need to gain enlightenment. It's a bad place to be. But in a way, the Wind in the Willows is opposite. It describes all the really good things about life, the things that we can really be grateful for and enjoy in a very nice way, in a very uncraving kind of way. It's a lovely book. But then you get to the chapter called The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and it's completely different. You go to a completely different level. It's quite astonishing, really. It's best to read the chapter in the context of the book. But still, I'm going to read the chapter. I don't know how long that's going to take. And then I'll look at my watch and I'll figure out what we're going to do next. We'll have a tea break. What I hope to do is get a few comments on the chapter afterwards, and how did that feel to you and so on. And at some point at the end towards the evening, I want to give a commentary on the chapter, because what might happen is you might really enjoy me reading the chapter, but then go away from the evening thinking, that was very nice, but what's it got to do with the Dharma? So I want to make a few connections for you, probably connections you can make yourself actually, but never mind. As Dharma Dinner once said, never overlook the obvious. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read the chapter in a moment. And before I do that, I think I'll turn one of the lights off. It's a bit too bright in here. That's better. And you can close your eyes, of course, just get comfy. Are you seated comfortably? Then we shall begin. Chapter 7, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The willow wren was twittering his thin little song. Hidden himself in the dark selvage of the riverbank. Though it was past 10 o'clock at night, the sky still clung to and retained some lingering skirts of light from the departed day. And the sullen heats of the torrid afternoon broke up and rolled away at the dispensing touch of the cool fingers of the short midsummer night. Mole lay stretched on the bank, still panting from the stress of the fierce day that had been cloudless from dawn to late sunset, and waited for his friend to return. He had been on the river with some companions, leaving the water rat free to keep an engagement of long standing with the otter. And he had come back to find the house dark and deserted, and no sign of Rat, who was doubtless keeping up late with his old comrade. It was still too hot to think of staying indoors, so he lay on some cool dock leaves and thought over the past day and its doings, and how very good they had all been. The rat's light footfall was presently heard approaching over the parched grass. "Oh, the blessed coolness," he said, and sat down, gazing thoughtfully into the river, silent and preoccupied. "You stayed to supper, of course," said the mole presently. "Simply had to," said the rat. "They wouldn't hear of my going before. You know how kind they always are. And they made things as jolly for me as ever they could, right up to the moment I left. But I felt a brute all the time, as it was clear to me they were very unhappy, though they tried to hide it. Mole, I'm afraid they're in trouble. Little Portly is missing again, and you know what a lot his father thinks of him, though he never says much about it." "What, that child?" said Mole lightly. "Well, suppose he is. Why worry about it? He's always straying off and getting lost and turning up again. He's so adventurous. But no harm ever comes to him. Everybody hereabouts knows him and likes him, just as they do old Otter. And you may be sure some animal or other will come across him and bring him back again all right. Why, we found him ourselves miles from home and quite self-possessed and cheerful." "Yes, but this time it's more serious," said the rat gravely. "He's been missing for some days now, and the otters have hunted everywhere, high and low, without finding the slightest trace. And they've asked every animal too, for miles around, and no one knows anything about him. Otter's evidently more anxious than he'll admit. I got out of him that young Portly hasn't learnt to swim very well yet, and I can see he's thinking of the weir. There's a lot of water coming down still, considering the time of the year, and the place always had a fascination for the child. And then there are, well, traps and things, you know. Otter's not the fellow to be nervous about any son of his before it's time, and now he is nervous. When I left, he came out with me, said he wanted some air and talked about stretching his legs, but I could see it wasn't that. So I drew him out and pumped him and got it all from him at last. He was going to spend the night watching by the ford. You know, the place where the old ford used to be in bygone days before they built the bridge. I know it well, said the mole, but why should Otter choose to watch there? Well, it seems that it was there he gave Portly his first swimming lesson, continued the rat, from that shallow, gravelly spit near the bank. And it was there he used to teach him fishing, and there young Portly caught his first fish, of which he was so very proud. The child loved the spot, and Otter thinks that if he came wandering back from wherever he is, if he is anywhere by this time, poor little chap, he might make for the ford he was so fond of. Or if he came across it, he'd remember it well and stop there and play, perhaps. So Otter goes there every night and watches on the chance, just on the chance. They were silent for a time, both thinking of the same thing. The lonely, heart-sore animal crouched by the ford, watching and waiting the long night through on the chance. Well, well, said the rat presently, I suppose we ought to be thinking about turning in. But he never offered to move. Rat, said the mole, I simply can't go and turn in and go to sleep and do nothing, even though there doesn't seem to be anything to be done. We'll get the boat out and paddle upstream. The moon will be up in an hour or so, and then we will search as well as we can. Anyhow, it will be better than going to bed and doing nothing. Just what I was thinking myself, said the rat. It's not the sort of night for bed anyhow, and daybreak is not so very far off. And then we may pick up some news of him from early risers as we go along. They got the boat out, and the rat took the sculls, paddling with caution. Out in midstream, there was a clear, narrow track that faintly reflected the sky. But wherever the shadows fell on the water from bank, bush, or tree, they were as solid to all appearance as the banks themselves, and the mole had to steer with judgment accordingly. Dark and deserted as it was, the night was full of small noises, song and chatter and rustling, telling of the busy little population who were up and about, plying their trades and vocations through the night till sunshine should fall on them at last and send them off to their well-earned repose. The water's own noises, too, were more apparent than by day. Its gurglings and cloops more unexpected and near at hand. And constantly they started at what seemed a sudden clear call from an actual articulate voice. The line of the horizon was clear and hard against the sky, and in one particular quarter it showed black against a silvery climbing phosphorescence that grew and grew. At last, over the rim of the waiting earth, the moon lifted with slow majesty till it swung clear of the horizon and rode off, free of moorings. And once more they began to see surfaces, meadows widespread, and quiet gardens, and the river itself from bank to bank, all softly disclosed, all washed clean of mystery and terror, all radiant again as by day, but with a difference that was tremendous. Their old haunts greeted them again in other raiment, as if they had slipped away and put on this pure new apparel and come quietly back, smiling as they shyly waited to see if they would be recognized again under it. Fastening their boat to a willow, the friends landed in this silent silver kingdom and patiently explored the hedges, the hollow trees, the runnels, and their little culverts, the ditches and dry waterways. Embarking again and crossing over, they worked their way up the stream in this manner, while the moon, serene and detached in a cloudless sky, did what she could, though so far off, to help them in their quest. Till her hour came and she sank earthwards reluctantly and left them, and mystery once more held field and river. Then a change began slowly to declare itself. The horizon became clearer. field and tree came more into sight, and somehow with a different look. The mystery began to drop away from them. A bird piped suddenly and was still. A light breeze sprang up and set the reeds and bulrushes rustling. Rat, who was in the stern of the boat, while Mole sculled, sat up suddenly and listened with a passionate intentness. Mole, who with gentle strokes was just keeping the boat moving while he scanned the banks with care, looked at him with curiosity. "It's gone," sighed the rat, sinking back in his seat again. "So beautiful and strange and new. Since it was to end so soon, I almost wish I had never heard it. For it has roused a longing in me that is pain, and nothing seems worthwhile but just to hear that sound once more and go on listening to it forever." "No, there it is again," he cried, alert once more. Entranced, he was silent for a long space, spellbound. "Now it passes on and I begin to lose it," he said presently. "Oh, Mole, the beauty of it, the merry bubble and joy, the thin, clear, happy call of the distant piping. Such music I never dreamed of, and the call in it stronger even than the music is sweet. Row on, Mole, row, for the music and the call must be for us." The Mole, greatly wondering, obeyed. "I hear nothing myself," he said, "but the wind playing in the reeds and rushes and osiers." The Rat never answered, if indeed he heard. Rapt, transported, trembling, he was possessed in all his senses by this new divine thing that caught up his helpless soul and swung and dandled it, a powerless but happy infant in a strong, sustaining grasp. In silence, Mole rowed steadily, and soon they came to a point where the river divided, a long backwater branching off to one side. With a slight movement of his head, Rat, who had long dropped the rudder lines, directed the rower to take the backwater. The creeping tide of light gained and gained, and now they could see the color of the flowers that gemmed the water's edge. "Clearer and nearer still," cried the Rat joyously. "Now you must surely hear it. Ah, at last I see you do." Breathless and transfixed, the Mole stopped rowing as the liquid run of that glad piping broke on him like a wave, caught him up and possessed him utterly. He saw the tears on his comrade's cheeks and bowed his head and understood. For a space they hung there, brushed by the purple loose strife that fringed the bank. Then the clear, imperious summons that marched hand in hand with the intoxicating melody imposed its will on Mole, and mechanically he bent to his oars again. And the light grew steadily stronger, but no birds sang, as they were wont to do at the approach of dawn. And but for the heavenly music, all was marvelously still. On either side of them, as they glided onwards, the rich meadow grass seemed that morning of a freshness and a greenness unsurpassable. Never had they noticed the roses so vivid, the willow herb so riotous, the meadow sweet so odorous and pervading. Then the murmur of the approaching weir began to hold the air, and they felt a consciousness that they were nearing the end, whatever it might be that surely awaited their expedition. A wide half circle of foam and glinting lights and shining shoulders of green water, the great weir closed the backwater from bank to bank, troubled all the quiet surface with twirling eddies and floating foam streaks, and deadened all other sounds with its solemn and soothing rumble. In midmost of the stream, embraced in the weir's shimmering arm spread, a small island lay anchored, fringed close with willow and silver birch and alder. Reserved, shy, but full of significance, it hid whatever it might hold behind a veil, keeping it till the hour should come, and with the hour, those who were called and chosen. Slowly, but with no doubt or hesitation whatever, and in something of a solemn expectancy, the two animals passed through the broken, tumultuous water and moored their boat at the flowery margin of the island. In silence, they landed and pushed through the blossom and scented herbage and undergrowth that led up to the level ground, till they stood on a little lawn of a marvellous green, set round with nature's own orchard trees, crabapple, wild cherry, and sloe. This is the place of my song dream, the place the music played to me, whispered the rat, as if in a trance. Here, in this holy place, here, if anywhere, surely we shall find him. Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head, and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror. Indeed, he felt wonderfully at peace and happy. But it was an awe that smote him and held him, and without seeing, he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. With difficulty, he turned to look for his friend and saw him at his side, cowed, stricken, and trembling violently. And still there was utter silence in the populous, bird-haunted branches around them. And still the light grew and grew. Perhaps he would never have dared to raise his eyes, but that, though the piping was now hushed, the call and the summons seemed still dominant and imperious. He might not refuse were death himself waiting to strike him instantly, once he had looked with mortal eye on things rightly kept hidden. Trembling, he obeyed and raised his humble head. And then, in that utter clearness of the imminent dawn, while nature, flushed with fullness of incredible colour, seemed to hold her breath for the event, he looked in the very eyes of the friend and helper, saw the backward sweep of the curved horns gleaming in the growing daylight, saw the stern, hooked nose between the kindly eyes that were looking down on them humorously, while the bearded mouth broke into a half smile at the corners, saw the rippling muscles on the arm that lay across the broad chest, the long, supple hand still holding the panpipes only just fallen away from the parted lips, saw the splendid curves of the shaggy limbs disposed in the majestic ease on the sward. Saw, last of all, nestling between his very hooves, sleeping soundly in entire peace and contentment, the little, round, podgy, childish form of the baby otter. All this he saw for one moment, breathless and intense, vivid in the morning sky. And still, as he looked, he lived. And still, as he lived, he wondered. Rat, he found breath to whisper, shaking. Are you afraid? Afraid, murmured the rat, with his eyes shining with unutterable love. Afraid of him? Oh, never, never. And yet, oh mole, I am afraid. Then the two animals, crouching to the earth, bowed their heads and did worship. Sudden and magnificent, the sun's broad golden disk showed itself over the horizon facing them, and the first rays shooting across the level water meadows took the animals full in the eyes and dazzled them. When they were able to look once more, the vision had vanished, and the air was full of the carol of birds that hailed the dawn. As they stared blankly in dumb misery, deepening as they slowly realized all they had seen and all they had lost, a capricious little breeze dancing up from the surface of the water tossed the aspens, shook the dewy roses, and blew lightly, caressingly in their faces. And with its soft touch came instant oblivion. For this is the last best gift that the kindly demigod is careful to bestow on those to whom he has revealed himself in their helping, the gift of forgetfulness, lest the awful remembrance should remain and grow and overshadow mirth and pleasure, and the great haunting memory should spoil all the afterlives of little animals helped out of difficulties, in order that they should be happy and light-hearted as before. Mole rubbed his eyes and stared at Rat, who was looking about him in a puzzled sort of way. I beg your pardon, what did you say, Rat? He asked. I think I was only remarking, said Rat slowly, that this was the right sort of place, and that here, if anywhere, we should find him. And look, why, there he is, the little fellow. And with a cry of delight, he ran towards the slumbering portly. But Mole stood still a moment, held in thought, as one wakened suddenly from a beautiful dream, who struggles to recall it and can recapture nothing but a dim sense of the beauty of it, the beauty, till that too fades away in its turn, and the dreamer bitterly accepts the hard, cold waking and all its penalties. So Mole, after struggling with his memory for a brief space, shook his head sadly and followed the rat. Portly woke up with a joyous squeak and wriggled with pleasure at the sight of his father's friends who had played with him so often in past days. In a moment, however, his face grew blank, and he fell to hunting round in a circle with a pleading whine, as a child that has fallen happily asleep in its nurse's arms and wakes to find itself alone and laid in a strange place, and searches corners and cupboards and runs from room to room, despair growing silently in its heart. Even so, Portly searched the island and searched, dogged and unwearying, till at last the black moment came for giving it up and sitting down and crying bitterly. The mole ran quickly to comfort the little animal, but Rat, lingering, looked long and doubtfully at certain hoof marks deep in the sward. Some great animal has been here, he murmured slowly and thoughtfully, and stood musing, his mind strangely stirred. Come along, Rat, called the mole. Think of poor Otter waiting up there by the ford. Portly had soon been comforted by the promise of a treat, a jaunt on the river in Mr. Rat's real boat, and the two animals conducted him to the water's side, placed him securely between them in the bottom of the boat, and paddled off down the backwater. The sun was fully up by now and not hot on them. Birds sang lustily and without restraint, and flowers smiled and nodded from either bank, but somehow, so thought the animals, with less of richness and blaze of colour than they seemed to remember seeing quite recently somewhere. They wondered where. The main river reached again, they turned the boat's head upstream towards the point where they knew their friend was keeping his lonely vigil. As they drew near the familiar ford, the mole took the boat into the bank and they lifted Portly out and set him on his legs on the towpath, gave him his marching orders and a friendly farewell pat on the back and shoved out into midstream. They watched the little animal as he waddled along the path contentedly and with importance. Watched him till they saw his muzzle suddenly lift and his waddle break into a clumsy amble as he quickened his pace with shrill whines and wriggles of recognition. Looking up the river, they could see Otter start up, tense and rigid, from out of the shadows where he crouched in dumb patience, and could hear his amazed and joyous bark as he bounded up through the osiers onto the path. Then the mole, with a strong pull on the oar, swung the boat round and let the full stream bear them down again, whither it would, their quest now happily ended. I feel strangely tired, Rat, said the mole, leaning wearily over his oars as the boat drifted. It's being up all night, you'll say, perhaps, but that's nothing. We do as much half the nights of the week as at this time of the year. No, I feel as if I had been through something very exciting and rather terrible, and it was just over, and yet nothing particular has happened. Or something very surprising and splendid and beautiful, murmured the rat, leaning back and closing his eyes. I feel just as you do, Mole, simply dead tired, though not body tired. It's lucky we've got the stream with us to take us home. Isn't it jolly to feel the sun again, soaking into one's bones, and hark to the wind playing in the reeds? It's like music, far away music, said the mole, nodding drowsily. So I was thinking, murmured the rat, dreamful and languid. Dance music, the lilting sort that runs on without a stop, but with words in it too. It passes into words and out of them again. I catch them at intervals. Then it is dance music once more, and then nothing but the reed's soft, thin whispering. You hear better than I, said the mole sadly. I cannot catch the words. Let me try and give you them, said the rat softly, his eyes still closed. Now it is turning into words again, faint but clear. Lest the oar should dwell and turn your frolic to fret, you shall look on my power at the helping hour, but then you shall forget. Now the reeds take it up. Forget, forget, they sigh, and it dies away in a rustle and a whisper. Then the voice returns. Lest limbs be reddened and rent, I spring the trap that is set. As I lose the snare, you may glimpse me there, for surely you shall forget. Row nearer, mole, nearer to the reeds. It is hard to catch and grows each minute fainter. Helper and healer I cheer, small waifs in the woodland wet. Strays I find in it, woods I bind in it, bidding them all forget. Nearer, mole, nearer. No, it is no good. The song has died away into reed talk. But what do the words mean? Asked the wondering mole. That I do not know, said the rat simply. I pass them on to you as they reached me. Ah, now they return again, and this time full and clear. This time at last it is the real, the unmistakable thing. Simple, passionate, perfect. Well, let's have it then, said the mole, after he had waited patiently for a few minutes, half dozing in the hot sun. But no answer came. He looked and understood the silence. With a smile of much happiness on his face, and something of a listening look still lingering there, the weary rat was fast asleep. Okay, that's the story of the piper at the gates of dawn. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm wondering whether some of you are wondering what that's got to do with the Dharma, but maybe some of you caught something and you can see some connections. But what I'd like to do now is invite anybody who would like to say how the story landed with them, what happened for you, how you felt, and so on. Yeah, I'll say a few words about that chapter from the book. I hope I don't say anything that's too obvious. Before I begin, I'd like to just say a few words about something that I discovered a few years ago, a very interesting distinction between different kinds of speech. One is called speech is informative, and the other is speech that is performative. I find this a very, very useful distinction. So informative speech is, if I was giving a Dharma talk, I'd tell you things you didn't already know. I'm informing you of something. But performative speech is you don't learn anything. So the kinds of times when you use performative speech, especially in kind of some ritual or ceremony, for instance, a marriage is full of performative speech. You know, you have to go through things, you have to say things at a certain point, and at the end you have to say, I do. I don't know if people still say that in England, I do. In Germany, they say ja. And, you know, when I was married in Germany a few years ago, when it was time for me to say ja, if I had not said ja, everyone would have been like aghast. It's like, whoa, what's going on? I had to say ja. They didn't learn anything from me, but I had to say it. Similarly with the ordination, I don't know if any of you have been at an ordination ceremony or a mitra ceremony. You go through a whole set of words and, you know, verses and so on, and it's all set up and you all have to say it as it goes through. You don't say anything new. And a lot of people have heard it all before, but it has to be said. So your speech is an action. It's speech when performative speech is speech as action. And so the puja is performative. When you do a puja, you don't learn anything new. After you've done it a few hundred times, it's just the same old puja, but you go through it, you perform that puja. And I think it's very interesting to look at Buddhist texts in that kind of way, that some Buddhist texts are informative. They tell you stuff you didn't already know. And others don't tell you very much. And I know some people, when they look at the Pali Canon, then there's this text and it's not telling you very much, they get a bit disappointed. It's just like, what's this? there's nothing new in here, I'm not learning anything. Perhaps they've missed the point there. Maybe the point of that text is not to inform you, but for you to perform it. And I think many Mahayana sutras are performative rather than informative. I slipped there and I said transformative. So here's a little phrase that I often use. All Dharma texts are transformative, and some do that by being informative, and some do it by being performative. You perform the text, and by performing the text, you change. Yeah, I could give you some examples, but I don't have time for that. So I think the chapter that I just read you, The Pipe at the Gates of the Dawn, is somewhat like that. I've read it a number of times now. I've read it. This is the third time I've read it out loud to people. And every time I read it, I'm moved. There was a point in there where I felt the tears coming. I had to hold them back, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to carry on reading. But it does it every time to me. So by reading that text, I'm performing a sequence in a way, a story, obviously a story, but you're performing a story. And by performing the story, you're transforming something in yourself as you do it. And so what happens in the story is you've got Ratty and Mole. And of course, if you'd read the book up by now, you've got to know them quite well. And you know they have a really good friendship. It's lovely and sweet, but it's also quite deep. They really look out for each other and they help others as well. So you didn't really get that from the reading this evening, but you know you would have that if you've read the book. And it starts off, it's the end of a really gorgeous sunny summer's day. And Mole doesn't want to go indoors, it's too hot. So he's lying in the grass, cooling down a little bit. And you get this idea of this idyllic kind of scene. And then his great friend Rat comes along, and very soon it becomes clear to Mole that things aren't good. You know, there's something wrong. Portly is missing, and it's quite serious. It takes him a while to realize the seriousness of it. And then they can't go to sleep. You know, not with this going on, they have to do something. So they're friends with Otto and his family, of course. So it's like the whole thing is in friendship. They have to do something. So they decide to get in the boat, and they think, well, I think Mole says, who knows, well, let's go out, and we can't just sit here and do nothing. So off they go, and they get in the boat, and it's nighttime, of course, it's in the middle of the night. And they start rowing, and they're rowing upstream against the stream of the river. They're rowing upstream, so it's hard work. And off they go into the night. But then at a certain point, the moon comes up from the horizon, and it transforms the whole countryside. It transforms what they're seeing. There's the transformation for you. It transforms what they're seeing. Before, it was dark. They couldn't tell the difference between a shadow and the actual bank. They had to be really careful. And then the moon comes out, and everything is clear, but different. It's not like in the daytime. They can see everything, but everything is transformed into silver light. So there they are. They're going, rowing, off they go. They don't know where they're going. They're looking for Portly. They have no idea whether they can find him, but they're on a quest. The word quest is used, isn't it? And then the moon begins to go down. And they see a side water, and for some reason Rat intuits that's the way to go. That's the way to go. And I can't remember the sequence right now, but they go down into this side water, and it starts becoming light. Yeah, the moon has gone down, the lovely silvery light is gone, but the daylight, the sun is coming up. And they hear one bird, and then it stops, but all is silent. So you've got this really beautifully, and Kenneth Grahame is such a great writer. You've got this beautiful scene of utter stillness and serenity as they're going down this backwater, looking for their friend's little otter baby. I don't know what they're called, otters, otter cub maybe. And off they go down this backwater. And then it starts becoming light, and they hear, before they see it, they hear the weir, and they're going towards the weir. And I can't remember the sequence now, but they stop. I think they get to the bank, and actually, no, the sequence isn't quite like that, is it? No, what happens is the Ratty begins to hear something. He doesn't know what it is, but it has a tremendous effect on him, a very deep effect on him. It's kind of alluring, it's attracting him, but at the same time, it's frightening, it's awe-inspiring, but he has to go. And he says to Mole, that way, we've got to go that way. And Mole has no idea why, because his hearing can't be as good. He can't hear, but Rat is saying, we've got to go that way. And off they go. And eventually Mole hears it too. And what is it they hear? They hear the piping of the piper, the great god Pan. He's piping, he's drawing them near. And so off they go. And the piping is beautiful and frightening at the same time, awe-inspiring. And at one point, of course, you know, they look at each other, with tears in their eyes. It's so beautiful. They're moved to tears by it. And at the same time, well, it's beautiful, they're attracted, and they're frightened all at once. It's quite an interesting, fascinating kind of combination of emotions they're feeling. And off they go. Well, I'm telling you what you already know, aren't I? You've heard all this. So what's all this got to do with the Dharma? Well, the way I see it is that my feeling about the closeness to the Dharma is that it's based in friendship and love. The whole thing is based in friendship and love. And they go off on this quest through love for their friend Otter and his little cub, Portly. So there's compassion there. There's love and there's compassion, and it's driving them to go. And they don't know where they're going to go. They don't know how on earth they're going to find little Portly, but off they go. And so, yeah, their motivation is friendship and love. Off they go. And the way I understand this is that as they're traveling upstream against the stream coming against them, so they're going against something, off they go, and then the night is transfigured. There's a piece of music by Schoenberg called Transfigured Night. It's just like that. It's just like it just changes. When I was a teenager, we used to do this kind of thing. You know, we'd be up all night and in the summer, and let's go out, and off we went, and it's magical. Magic is the word, isn't it? It's this magical scene. And so the night is transfigured. So what meaning does that have? You don't need to really give it a meaning, but the way I understand it is that their motivation is one of love and friendship, and they're on a quest to save someone in a way. They want to help. And in doing that, they are transformed. Their state of mind is transformed. You could say that the moonlight coming up is the beginning of super conscious states of mind. It's like dhyana. They're entering into a kind of magical dhyana, and off they go into the dhyana, and then that goes. That's interesting, isn't it? The moon goes, and you get this in the spiral path, don't you? You get joy and rapture, and then you get prashrabdi, which is a calming down. And then so off they go, and they hear this enthralling sound, and they're attracted. Off they go. They're attracted towards this. They put the boat to the side, and then as far as I remember the story, then the great god Pan appears to them. Yeah, it's just, somebody just put up there. It's a Pink Floyd album. It's one of the first Pink Floyd albums. No surprises, no guesses for why they chose that title. Yeah, so the great god Pan appears, and the whole scene suddenly, the feeling changes. They're attracted. That you don't know what they're attracted to, but then this is it. The great god Pan, the friend and helper. What does that mean? Who on earth is the great god Pan? And it's extraordinary, isn't it? Because when you hear the friend and helper, you think of a Jesus-like person, but no, horns coming out of his head, going backwards, a beard, a hooked nose, kindly eye, humorous eyes, and shaggy body, and his hoofs on the ground with his shaggy legs. It's like an animal type person, an animal man in a way, an animal person. And he's been playing his panpipes, of course, and he has found Portly, and he has attracted them to him. in the night. So what's all this got to do with the Dharma? The way I understand it is that Pan, the description of Pan reminds me really of Padmasambhava, mysterious with a beard and a hooked nose, and that Padmasambhava's face is both smiling and fierce at the same time, and I get that definite feeling from the great god Pan. And there they are. They've come to the end of their quest. There's Portly at Pan's, the great god Pan's feet. There he is. So then what happens is the sun eventually comes up above the horizon and blinds them for a few moments. And when they open their eyes, the god Pan has disappeared. He's gone. So he's done his work. They found Portly. And they immediately forget. Forgetfulness. It's amazing, isn't it? This forgetfulness. They cannot retain the remembrance, the memory of that awe-inspiring moment of seeing Pan. They just can't remember. And they're left kind of puzzled. They know something's happened, but they don't know what. Looking at each other, what just happened there? Where are we? Oh, there's Portly, and they kind of forget about it, but they don't. They forget, but they don't forget. You know, they start looking after Portly and seeing to him and helping him, and they put him in the boat and off they go. But the lingering feeling that something really majestic, really important has just happened stays with them. But they can't, it's, what is it? The famous line of T.S. Eliot, which has become a cliche now, of course, but humankind cannot bear too much reality. So rats and moles cannot bear too much reality. It's too much for them. So he's kind. The kindness of Pan is he allows them to forget because it's too much for them to hold. What does that mean? It's hard to really understand what that means in Dharmic terms. But perhaps it's that sometimes you get an insight and it's really meaningful and you get it, but it's too much to bear. It's too much reality. So you have it, but then as time goes by, you kind of forget it. It loses its strength, its significance to you. And you have to have it another time when you're a bit more prepared for it. There was a time in Poland a few years ago, I was leading a reflection retreat. And at one point, I got them all to go out into the woods and reflect on impermanence. I thought it was safe, you know, reflect on impermanence. It's a safe thing to reflect on. No, this young man, Jacek, he came back, he was completely freaked out. He'd been reflecting on impermanence as he went through the forest, and he realized it, that everything is impermanent. The forest was just a fleeting thing, and he was fleeting, and it really freaked him out. And I went back a couple of years later, and he came on another retreat of mine, another reflection retreat, and we had a talk beforehand, and he was a bit frightened for obvious reason. He said, "What am I going to do?" I said, "Don't reflect on impermanence, you know, because it's too much for you." But that's the kind of thing, you know, it's like we want reality, we want to have insight, we want to gain insight, but we can only hold it when we're really ready. So anyway, yeah. You could almost see this as the rising of the bodhicitta, couldn't you, in Mahayana terms? That this is the rising of the bodhicitta for them. Although perhaps the arising of the bodhicitta had happened beforehand, but no. I'm just looking at a text by Tsongkhapa today, a famous text called The Three Principles of the Path. And there's just three aspects to it. The first is renunciation. The second is compassion. And the third is bodhicitta. And you have to do the renunciation and compassion first before the bodhicitta will arise. And so it's a bit like that, isn't it? They renounce their easy life, their easy nights of slumber to go out looking out of compassion. So with renunciation and compassion, the bodhicitta arises. You could understand it like that. With things like that, you can't really have a definite meaning to anything. It's all kind of feeling meaning rather than what the fantasy writer Neil Gaiman calls shadow truths. He says fantasies often contain truth. Of course, this didn't really happen in real life, but it contains shadow truths. And I think this is what this story contains. It contains some really important shadow truths. So they find Portly and they put him in the boat and they come back. And it's very interesting. They come back downstream. There's no effort involved, so they've had this massive thing happen to them and they come, no, wait a minute. I might be getting muddled up here because they have to go back. No, I've got it all wrong, haven't they? They have to go upstream to get to the where the otter is. But then they leave Portly with his father, and then they go downstream. So their work is done. So they're just floating downstream now. I can't help thinking about stream entry. I'm sorry, it just has to occur to me here that the stream entry, the work is done, and now the effort is effortless. They're going back. And on the way back home, they're dog tired, much tireder than they should be, because obviously something big has happened to them. It's completely shattered them. And they still got this lingering memory of something really important that happened, and they don't know what it was. And Rat, who's obviously the more sensitive one to it, hears it again. I can hear it. And he can even hear the words, and he says the words until such time he just falls asleep. He has to go into oblivion. He can't hold it any longer. And at the weekend on Saturday, I watched this beautiful interview. Maitreya Bandhu interviewed Padmavajra on a seminar that Sangha did many, many years ago on the Shepherd's Search for Mind, a Milarepa story. And I watched it because I love Padmavajra, but also because he and I were ordained together. And we were ordained, the weekend we were ordained, Bhante led that seminar for us. So that seminar is obviously really, really important to us. But it's quite interesting because Padmavajra admitted he could hardly remember anything about it, and nor can I. I remember hardly anything. But it's like a jewel from 44 years ago. It's a jewel shining. And I know it was really, really significant, but it's gone. The memory is gone. But the feeling, the sense of it is still there. So they come back and no doubt they go to bed. Well, maybe they don't because it's daylight. I don't know what they're going to do now, but they just get on with their little animal lives as if nothing has ever happened. Yeah. Beautiful. I just love it. That's it from me this evening. All I've got.